Hello and welcome to another edition of the Low Code Campfire. This is episode number 75 for Friday, November 18, 2022. Today we'll talk a little bit about our Black Friday, Cyber Monday sale and anything else you want to talk about. But first, let me introduce myself. My name is Dale Warner. I am head of support for Plantanet. This is an event we hold every Friday this hour, and it's a community gathering to share experiences and what you know about low code with others. So it's all skill levels welcome. All our past episodes are recorded on YouTube, our YouTube channel, youtube.com/plantanet. So you can use that QR code or any of the links that are up here in the material we send you to get out to youtube.com/plantanet and subscribe. We run a pretty simple agenda, pretty informal. We say hi and then we'll go around the campfire. We'll talk about first call and any contributions that have been made to our community website. We'll talk about feature requests, submitted topics, anything submitted in advance, and anything else you want to talk about. But after a while, when about an hour or so, we'll go into our afterglow segment. That's where we turn off the recording and raise a virtual beer and have a chat. Please engage with us, jump in. Meeting format, very straightforward. We have just a couple of guidelines. Be nice, and if you've got noise going on behind you, please mute. You can submit topics in advance using this QR code, or again, you'll find this link in our emails to you. With that, I'll say hello. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Small group and all friends. What's going on? Anybody with a first call? All right, it's going to be one of those Fridays. Nothing burning, huh?
I'm burning.
All right.
Hi, Dale. Jerry here.
Hey, Jerry.
Just logged in. I'm getting my stuff set up. Give me just a sec. Sorry, I missed first call. I do have something, if I'm allowed.
Please.
DNN, where are we? 9.11, the latest, greatest DNN. Where are we with Planta app versus DNN 9.11 or whatever the latest version is?
Sure. So far as I know, DNN 9.11 is the latest version for DNN, and we are compatible when you go to version 1.23. So 1.22 and before is compatible with 9.10.2, but incompatible with 9.11. So when you get to when you want to go to 9.11, you also have to go to version 1.23 or above.
Okay, good to know. And it's just about that time that we're going to be migrating another client onto Planta app from legacy, which we start at 1.15 and kind of climb up the ladder. Is that how one would start if they've been around our environment for years and years and years, but it's time to come on up? And if in this particular case, they're already I'll use the term DNN sharp up to 1.15, just not Planta app.
So we do have a document that covers that in our learn.planapp.com, and I can point you to it. But you're absolutely right. If they're the first step is to get them whatever DNN sharp modules are present. You want to get them, make sure they're all on the same major minor version. So 5.15, if that's where they are, that's great. Right. So then yes, you would install 1.15 and then step them up with the one-click upgrade. We'll bring them up to current.
Got it. Okay. All right. Well, that was my immediate needs.
Yep.
All right. I'll mute and I'll just listen for a while. Thank you.
There really are in a pretty good spot there. That all in the same one. We have gotten clients that have moved to it that even have had modules predating version 5 and versions all over the place. So getting standard, getting all in the same spot is kind of the first problem, and so that's hard to do, right? Because you got to do them individually, individual modules, and wait for the reset and all that stuff. But if they're all in the same spot, you install the app builder, drop it, create a page, configuration page, drop it on there, and then that's going to do all the upgrading for you from there. So you'll have 6 or 7 steps, but all the modules will be present. It's pretty straightforward.
Thank you for that. And our intent is to make that as easy as possible and take advantage of things that we can't take advantage of because we're not on Plant and App. And so I really appreciate that. And you and I will talk more about that as our journey goes forward. I'm in a great place right now to jump onto Plant and App with this particular client, and it's a big one. So just a little nervous to pull the trigger, but I know with the help of this board, we'll get it done.
Back up. Mm-hmm. Good. What else? Good morning, Jim. I see you snuck in there.
Yeah, sorry I'm late.
There's no late to Campfire.
No, it's interesting you were saying about backup, and I was reflecting on that. And I don't know what other people's situation is, but in the past, rather than taking a backup, doing the dirty deed on live, and if it all goes wrong, restoring the backup, what we would do is take is use the backup to spin up a clone and work on the clone, and you go through all the steps, make sure they work, find what goes wrong, and develop a script. And once you've done that a couple of times, you can do it on live. It does mean messing about with domain names sometimes, and it does depend on your architecture. But what your hosting environment is like. But that can often be a good way of avoiding nasty surprises and the hassle of having to restore backups on a live system or a production system.
Absolutely, and it does get into licensing as well with Plant and App. Your license, your subscription has to cover being able to have a second environment. So having the ability to get into a clone is useful. But backup, having a viable backup, and that was really a very shortcut.
Oh yes,
backup, because there's also test, right?
Yeah,
I'm familiar with a customer right now that has they may have great backups. Install, might even be install a quick hotfix because you think you need it or you do need it, and you test just in the area of the thing that you did, and then you find out that over here something else broke. And so if you're doing it live on production without a really good plan is a recipe for sleepless nights.
Absolutely.
For me too. That's the problem.
Yeah, I think in the good old days, you were okay to do something with a local host, a local host domain, and that was quite handy, especially to go when you've got a long upgrade path to go through with various DNN versions and DNN sharp versions. But I'm not sure if that's still a thing.
No, it's not. You do have to have a license for every domain that runs the application. So, and each individual circumstance is different. So you just have to look into your licensing. But I absolutely agree. That's a great way to do it, to do it on a clone. And this is what we do internally. We have clones of things that we execute it on, so we know that it's going to work and give us the ability to test as much as we can before we do it on production. And even still, you want to have viable backup to restore. I mean, you cover 99% of the cases in that with that clone, and then there's the 1% where something else it goes wrong, or it wasn't a true clone. That's bitten us before. So various things can happen. Good. What else? I have a couple of things to generally talk about. SQL Server 2012 is already at end of life. I don't know. I don't know why this snuck up on us, but I think it happened on as of July. And that is the minimum that we have currently associated or published with our product. And so 10 years old. We are taking steps to update our minimums. And I'll just mention that 2016 is under consideration for the next version, wondering what, if any, impact this will have on you when we move our 2012 end of life. I mean, minimum.
One of my servers is running 2012. I've got to upgrade it anyway, so realistically the impact, as long as I know it's coming, obviously impact is not terribly significant.
Yeah, as far as I know, the way that we will implement this move would be to say that some future version is going to be so for example 123 right now will run with SQL Server 2012. Just arbitrary. We may say 124 or 125 would only be compatible with whatever our new minimum is, meaning we'll start to take advantage of things that are in later versions and not in 2012. So you'll have, it won't be forced on you in any way. It's just that in order to get higher versions, once we start taking advantage of these higher minimums, that's where you'll have to have your server upgraded. So there won't be any arm twisting or forcing. It's just, recognizing that our minimum is dealing with something that's at end of life. So I don't hear any hue and cry. No, nobody is horribly impacted. Does anybody have a recommendation what the right version, right next minimum is? We're discussing it internally, trying to figure out what's fair to support.
From my perspective, I think it's really based on functions that present advantage to plant an app. In other words, if there's no significant difference between two SQL versions from a plant an app standpoint, then, at least from my narrow perspective, it's probably better to lower the bar for a variety of reasons. But on the other hand, if there are things in the new versions of SQL that make things better, faster, cheaper for you, then that's obviously ways in a different direction.
So I've heard it kicked around. I know that there's some functions that, as we do our low code pages and some other things, that there's things like string ag as a function that was only available in 2016 and above. Apparently there's better JSON handling.
I was gonna say JSON is 2016 above only.
Hey guys, let me jump in real quick. I can tell you without giving you a list, 2016 is worth the upgrade. If you're a SQL guy, it's absolutely worth it. If that was the bare minimum, I understand Matt's point, but once you jump in there and you see what 2016 can do versus 2012, I see no problem with it. I have all my clients converted to 2016 already, just for what you were about to your point, Dale, was there's some functions in there particularly in JSON and string ag and a few others that just are amazing how easy SQL just got. So my vote is 2016 forward.
Maybe it does work in 2016, but the documentation site for string ag on Microsoft states that it's a SQL Server, and I mean SQL Server 2017 and later.
Really?
Yeah, that's what it says. Maybe there's a yep, just update it again. I'll send this link.
So, yeah, and you know, if we're going to move it, you want to move it far. I understand there's like a 2014. I don't know what we get out of that, but it's also only 2 years, right? So we don't want to move the minimums frequently. Anyway, that's just an ongoing discussion. We're holding it internally. If you have strong opinions or things that we should be considering, well, we would appreciate your thoughts. Good. So we did the teaser in the email that I sent out today was about Black Friday, Cyber Monday. I think I tried really hard to give it all away in the email, but not completely. So yeah, 90% discount on proof of concept. So if there's anybody that you know that can take advantage of that, I think that makes it $500 instead of $5,000 to get a week's worth of work to show that Plant an App is really the right answer. Prove that it's the right answer for a particular circumstance. So that's going on through the end of the month. At the end of I know there was one. It's next week in the U.S. Thanksgiving. Trying to figure out how many people would actually, whether or not it would make anybody crazy if we canceled next week. We haven't really decided yet, but just kind of talking about who would want to have a campfire next week.
I'd like to have a real campfire.
Yeah,
exactly. That's where I'll be. I will not be here.
I won't be here. Patrick and I won't be here. We would have to enlist one of our non-Thanksgiving celebrator countries to host. But anyway, probably leaning towards canceling. We'll announce that early next week. Okay. Campfire contributions. So finally, I got around. I don't think I had posted it before, the National Address Database and the steps. If it wasn't in there, I've updated a little bit. Yeah, I added it this time. And then latitude, longitude search. That's a technique that I came up. If several of you were on that call on that webinar on Wednesday, technique that I discovered about 7 years ago, and didn't know within this group if there's a better way to do distance, or if this is still the best way to do distance from here to there.
So this is Mark. I was actually pretty excited to see your ability to calculate distance between latitude and longitude points. I had attempted that a year ago, and I wound up going around it, doing something different. So really like your SQL Server way to do that.
Well, yeah, I mean, for me, it was, let's see, where's Campfire here? For me, it was a nice, I mean, I think SQL, right? So to be able to query and say, I want stuff this distance away or less than or greater than, and to have it do that computation on the fly so that you can compare it from one point to another, stuff like that. It seemed, and it's not a very involved function. You just got to know a little bit about that geography thing, which turned up in a post I saw. I think I left the link to the original post where SQL Authority, where I got that from, and it's more than 10 years old. So that's why I didn't know if there was, something new and built in that did it better, but seems to be pretty zippy.
So it's been around for 10 years. That's humbling. I didn't find it. I wish I had, but that's good to know.
Yep. So, I'm going to be doing some more work in this area. Again, I think I shared on the webinar, I'm doing something for my church, and I'm going to be working more in it tomorrow. It's always fun for me to get involved in a real project. I mean, you guys might imagine a lot of my day when you submit individual things, it's like I'm looking at a little slice of the product. And so to actually try to put together something that is a whole system, you start to encounter more things and maybe bump into the errors myself, issues that need to be reported to development. So anyway, it's interesting to me to actually develop something instead of hunt for bugs. But I'm going to be doing some stuff with this to do kind of routing through a map. If you have 100 points and you want to get from point A to point B and assign them out, have a route to travel. That's the kind of work I'm doing. Involve some workflows and recursion, and I think it'll be fun. Probably end up being another topic before I'm over with.
Will you be doing some sort of calculation for actual miles versus straight line distances?
It's going to be a combination of, let's see if I go back here and looking at this database. The plan, the database itself here, not the importer. So I've got these, I've got it broken out into address number and then this street address, which this is kind of a uniform. The idea that would be that you would want to travel for, if you're doing farm to market, 1389 North, you would want to go probably in house number order. But if you, when you run out of houses, well, then what? Going to one that's close by the points where you already are, and then traveling along on that street. That's how I'm approaching it at the first spot. But you're right. They're ultimate. I mean, sometimes just looking at house numbers, there's more distance from one to another that it could be a very long, and you wouldn't want to assign things that have huge gaps in them and things like that. So I don't really know until I get into the data exactly what I'm going to find. But I am using, Jerry. It's all going to go up against a map, so. You're having contributed that makes me look like a wizard when I show it off. So looking forward to that.
Does Google have a routing API that you can call?
Yes.
I think it probably does.
I think it's a paid feature though.
I think it is.
I think OpenStreetMap. I'm trying to remember if they do as well, but I think there are a couple of open source ones that have them.
So once I found this free, I mean, I was going down the path of Google with all this to start with, and it was just the fact that all this information is out there in raw form, and I didn't need any enhancement, right? It's just addresses and latitude and longitude. I didn't need names or anything else. So Google was my go-to when I was going to enhance it, or if I had an address and needed latitude, longitude. I think they do have routing as well, but being able to do it for free and DIY, I think Plankton app is going to get me there without having to pay an outside service. In my travels to get this far, I started out by trying to use county data, which is public data, and it had some it had addresses without latitude, longitude, and then I was just dismayed at how poor the quality of data was coming from the county, because they're really all about collecting taxes and not about delivering things, and so they don't really care if the addresses are right or uniform. It's just so long as they get their money. At least that's what it seemed to me. So this national address database is all about uniformity was very nice for me. Okay. Let's wander on to feature requests. Community. So there was this one, since last time we talked about unlimited file attachments. So the file attachment thing in action form, it allows you to attach up to 5 very easily. And I need to prove this out, but I think you can attach an unlimited number through the token option. Is anybody using that? Almost.
I am.
I've used the token option, but I haven't tried to max it out. But it certainly says there that you can use it multiple times. So
yeah, and it's got a delimiter and stuff.
Yeah,
so as long as the files are up and on the server, should be able to attach. How many are you attaching, Sherry?
I think 7. It's certainly not a huge amount, but I will go find exactly how I did that. But I got past the 5 limitation very easily.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I forget about the context of these things. I went looking for this action for the send email action in workflows. And of course, in workflows, it doesn't have the context of a form with fields that it can link to. So these things don't even show up in that configuration. If you're in form, then you see, oh yeah, that you can pick up to 5 files and just, so basically people can upload the files and then attach them to an email right away. It's very straightforward, but like I say, the context of where you're using that thing changes the way even the way it looks. In workflow, the token attachment is the only way you can do it. So, anyway, I'm going to prove this one out, but I suspect if it can do the unlimited number through the token, that probably won't expand the way we do it in action form. Just a guess.
So hold on, I'm actually adding a feature request right now.
This is exciting.
So I'm thinking that, and I'm going to about ready to hit the submit here, but I'd like to see the feature that a button group does for some other fields. The feature being holding them together with less space in between, and also holding them together so they don't wrap on a narrow screen. have several situations where I'm doing mobile first and I want to put things side by side, and the browser or the mechanism keeps pushing the side by side to a vertical orientation. And there's plenty of room visually. I think that there's plenty of room, but it keeps pushing it down. So, a button group holds it nice side by side and it reduces some space in between. So I think that'd be really cool to have for some other things.
So yeah, but the app, the thing that I'm working on is also a mobile app, and I had noticed it really likes to, on a mobile device, it really likes to flip them to stacked.
Yeah, I'm kind of particular about presentation, and sometimes I don't want that. If you refresh, you'll see my new request.
It seems like, and Patrick, you can see if I'm making the stuff up. It seems like there's discussion about changing the way we lay out things and giving more control over that. It hasn't bubbled to the top yet.
Yeah.
Because, for example, like our layout stuff, it lets you put things side by side, but
you can't span rows.
Yes, we can't.
Yeah. So it's supposed to be making that more flexible.
Something related to that is if you put a button group on a row and then you try to put some other field on the same row, it just plain doesn't do that, or it didn't do that for a long time. I haven't tried it recently. It just pushes the second item down every time. So like button groups don't like to be good, friendly neighbors. Thinking about it, that very well have been a Bootstrap 3 thing. I haven't tried it in a while.
I haven't used much on button groups, so that I don't have a lot of familiarity there. We have so that there's it's there. If Mark's is there, if somebody else thinks that would be useful, you can click the thumbs up and give it votes. And I think it'd be useful.
Mark, I have a question for you. Have you tried using the custom layout, the manual layout for your form?
I would like to have credit for saying, yes, I've tried it, but honestly, I didn't put enough effort into it to get across the finish line.
Well, you might want to give that a try. If it doesn't obviate your request, because I think that's a good request, but you might want to try that, because then you've got full control. Essentially, all of your form fields wind up as simple tokens in your HTML layout, and you might have better control over that.
That is a good suggestion. Thank you.
So I am moving off into I think what is it here? We did contributions. I am moving off into dark corners here for a second. Wow, what is this? Grabbed the wrong thing. So there's a question on the community forum about FTP sites, and I had never used our FTP Actions. Do any of you use FTP Actions? Because I haven't gotten to the point where I'm solving the problem. I worked yesterday afternoon. It probably took me an hour and a half just to get the FTP set up working. I found a little FTP server that oh, thanks for the open route service, Jim. I'll take a look at that. I didn't really have a nice FTP server to talk to. So I had to set up an FTP server on a site, and then trying to figure out how to fill in these blanks for FTP URL and username and password and SSL and just the right combination of things to get it to work. So I just got it to the spot where I am uploading a file to an FTP server. Probably, sadly, one of the biggest things that got me was security. I had to open up. I just ended up opening up all the ports between this test server and my FTP server so that everything could go through. And probably should narrow that down a little bit if I needed to. But anyway, so it's just kind of sometimes the setup takes me a little bit longer. It's just a little bit more complex when you get into something like an FTP or Dynamics CRM or something that's requiring a couple of servers to talk to. You got to have some setup done. Anyway, finally got it to work. It's not that hard once you know what you're doing. But now I got to figure out why it doesn't work for that particular client's scenario. But at the end, I guess I'll be an FTP expert.
There you go.
Low code FTP expert. All right. Anybody else with a ghost story or a dark corner that they've been exploring?
So yeah, I think I might have had one of those this week.
I was about to ask you if you were gonna.
So I had, funny enough, I had a row of buttons that I wanted to keep together. Buttons 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and there was actually a sixth. So the buttons were not running actions; they were running JavaScript code, each one of them. They were running APIs to update a data point. Every time a button was clicked, it would change a data point in the database. And the problem was button number 2 wasn't firing right. It was causing a whole page refresh when it shouldn't be, because return false was set. So that was a indication something wasn't right, as well as it wasn't saving the data. And the reason this is a ghost story is because it turned out that the cause of the problem was some syntax in button number 1. So I was pushing button number 2, but button number 1 was causing 2 to fail. And it turns out that I was just calling the API in both places, and one of the inputs to the API was the user ID. And in button number 1, I was feeding user ID as the standard DNN token of, square user : user ID square. And it didn't like trying to figure out the user ID in the call to the API. I simply moved the user ID outside of the call to the API, and everything worked fine. So the ghost story was a different button caused the second button to fail.
Yep. I know I've worked on some things completely unrelated, but worked on things for you before, Mark, where you sent me the form. And as somebody who isn't intimately involved in the details of the project, you're just hunting, it's a different job when you're hunting for a bug. And so, I can remember loading up your form and keep stripping things out until it began to work. And then, it's kind of like you got 100 things and you divide it in half, you get 50, now you got 50 things and you divide it in half, and now you got 25 things, until you just hunt down. So very brute force hunting down whatever the problem was. In how many steps does it take? And
yes.
So that thing that you're talking about there, starting to strip things out might have gotten you there. But how did you end up finding it?
I stripped out button number 1 and ran button number 2. I suspected, after Jim Anthony actually gave the clue to look elsewhere. And thank you to Patrick also, who was helping with this. So I suspected since he said, look elsewhere, I suspected button number 1. So yeah, I just deleted it and everything worked great. So that then I had to figure out, why it didn't like the user ID that way.
If I can interject for a second, I've been noticing lately, a lot of people have, even on the message board, have made comments similar to what you're saying. Scoping is a big thing that can get very confusing with Plant and App, especially when you start throwing in client code versus server code versus Java code. Word of note, general rule of thumb, never use tokens inside Java scripts that you plan to make dynamic. Never do it, because you have to understand that the Java code is going to be replacing those tokens once at the time the form loads, never again. So if you're putting something like user ID or a module ID, whatever it is that you expect to potentially be updating itself every time you click it, it won't, because it'll only do it the first time the page loads. That code becomes static with whatever value you put in there. So the only way to truly do that is you'd have to make a function in Java code and then supply the value to the function. If you put it inside the function, 99% of the time, it's not going to work as you expect because of that whole scoping issue. The way that Plant and App does its token replacements.
We in that same vein, there's exactly what you said, and then there's kind of this front end versus back end that comes into play. And so, for example, if you have a file upload token and it provides things like sub tokens for absolute URL or relative URL, whatever, those only end up having context when the button is pushed because they're actually computed by the back end. So there's this understanding the lifespan. Anyway, we're updating the help text around that to try to get far more verbose, but explaining what you can and can't do, saying these things will work, these things won't work. But your guideline, I think, is very good, Ben.
Yeah, I mean, prime example, I think I had answered this on someone on the message board, and that was they were using an execute JavaScript action inside a execute on list entity.
Right.
So that's not going to work the way they expected, because they were expecting output on the client side, but the execute actions on a list entity is a server side thing that's going to loop on the server, and it's not going to output until it gets to the end. And then you can use that value to spit something out. They were expecting at every loop that they were going to get some feedback, like if it was an AJAX call, and it's not. So that's, again, that idea of scoping. You have to really fully understand where your code is being executed and how it's being executed, because that can easily trip you up, and then you're not getting the results you expect, and you're completely baffled as to why.
Yep. And it's, I mean, and it gets our people as well, right? That our implementation team from time to time will come up with and this happened recently with hey, I'm doing this and I'm using a valid token and it's not working, and just the fact we need to have a reminder, an inline reminder that certain things are just never going to work. That's not the model, and it's not the kind of thing that no coders and low coders are going to get into. But when you start trying to do more advanced things, it's
Right. And so, Ben, that was a really great explanation of how to expect it to have that work and not work. And I would say overall, this is one of the benefits of attending Campfire.
yeah, see.
It's true. People learn from the things that bite us.
Mhm.
Does that apply to other pieces of Planted App too? Like I see oddities sometimes where like a filter doesn't quite apply. You know, when I have a session variable with a customer ID, for instance, I'm trying to filter a grid. It doesn't always show the correct filter unless I refresh the page. Are there things like in like a SQL filter that where it'd be similar type problems where things are just being done at a different time?
So yeah, I think I mean, for example, if you have a form and a listing next to each other, and you have the form setting content into a session variable, that may not be read just by refreshing the listing. I wouldn't guarantee that it's going to read that. Versus if you pass it on the query string and the listing is set to watch the query string, then it will go. So there are definitely things that will come into play.
I'd say though, if you set the session variable and then explicitly do a refresh of the data source, it should work. But is that something that hasn't worked for you, Jim?
I haven't traced it down yet. It's
okay.
like, and seeing why it's not working, but it's more the, getting the right path to go down and look. I just noticed that sometimes it's reading the session variable and other times it seems not to be. But it could be have to do with a page refresh or something like that that's being done. And I like Ben's comment that code is being built dynamically at the time a page loads. It might be grabbing the variable then, and I just never realized it.
You're putting the variable in the data source parameters?
Yes, I believe so. I
bindings?
have to go look at the page now.
Yeah, I mean, when you're looking at that, if you use a cookie, if you use pretty much anything in there, it's only going to look at it at the time that the data source is being requested to be refreshed. So for example, at the time a page loads, or if you, like Patrick said, do a data source refresh command, then it'll do that. But if you're doing a button to update a session variable and you're not calling the data source refresh immediately after that, it's not going to update the data source. Just changing the value doesn't do it in and of itself, unless, like I believe Dale said, you're activating the query string watch, and you update the query string, that will automatically force the data source to refresh. But if you're using something that's hidden, you have to still manually tell the data source you need to refresh yourself and look at the new values.
And what I may be doing is, because I know it's not in the query string because part of the requirement was not to show the keys in the query string. But I may be telling it to refresh a grid and not refresh the data source. I don't know what the technical difference between the two is. Because you can, on a page, you can refresh a particular grid. And then I also see you can refresh a data source.
So you're doing this on a form?
It's there's multiple forms and grids on a page. So
what I mean is you're not doing it in the grid directly. You're doing the refresh from a form.
Yes.
Because there's a big difference. If you're doing it from the grid, there's data source refresh. If you're doing it from the form, there's, as Dale is showing right now, refresh listing.
Right. Is that doing the same thing? Or is there a technical difference?
It should be doing the same thing.
That should refresh the data source. Yep.
Yeah, refresh listing is intended to use to get to other to get to something else on the same page. Refresh data source doesn't accept any parameters, right? It's just
yeah, the data source of the grid that you're actively in.
Right.
Like I said, I've seen it, but I haven't gone to trace it yet. So it's one of those things where I've noticed it, but the customer hasn't yet. So I think, okay, what's going on?
And it's really not a problem, is what you're saying.
It will be. I know that somebody down the road, a user is going to go, hey, it told me I had this much, this many transactions. No, you're looking at an entirely different customer.
What I do, Jim, this is a very straightforward way of approaching it, is I'll oftentimes put say a static text of what I call diagnostics and expose that only to me. So that way you can put the values that you're checking, expose them, and see what's getting updated and when. So you have a peek inside, and that only you can see it.
We're on the same thought wave there. I was coming at it from Ben's approach a few weeks ago of a status message in a database where you had like a timer to refresh a page to sort of see it.
Yeah, your question actually makes me wonder something. On the grids refresh, if you're using something like a session variable, on a refresh, is that being retransmitted back? That might be where the issue is. There might be a situation, again, because of where the data is coming from. Session variables, cookie variables, those are on the browser as opposed to the server. So it could be that if you're using that in your parameters, yeah, it'll work the first time because on its initial load, it's got to grab that value. But on a refresh, that data might not be transmitted back, and maybe that's why you're seeing that issue. Typically, just so you know what I've done, because I've had situations where I've had to basically either hide or obfuscate data so that it doesn't show up in the URL. I've created tables where, for example, it just has a bunch of parameter information that I just insert directly into the table behind the scenes, and then it generates a GUID. And I use that GUID to reference it. So in the URL, you're just going to get some random GUID that doesn't actually convert to anything. And then the grid itself is going to use that GUID ID to look up that record to pull out the values that it's supposed to be using to do its calculations. So that way you're not actually putting anything in the URL. It's still all table-based, and it's all behind the scenes and hidden.
And that is exactly where I'm headed. I've been playing with session IDs and stuff, and I realized, oh, I can put a GUID off there and just carry that around in a token to refresh things and off in the table. And it actually gives me the ability to pass that to like a workflow. So if I want a workflow to update a status message for a front end process, I can pass that GUID in the workflow can update that table in the background too. So,
yeah. I mean, I started that because I actually found an issue where URLs, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, have a maximum limit of 2,000 characters. And I had a situation where I was doing stuff where if you go to a page, there was a return URL that had the full URL of the page that it came from. But then if you stack that, sometimes that page may have a return URL also. So it just compoundedly got worse to the point where I hit that limit. And then, of course, my URLs would break. So that's where I use this idea. So I just insert a full URL of what I'm returning to. It's parent page, so to speak, it's calling page, and it's assigned a GUID. And then what I do is I say my return URL is a GUID, and here's the ID. So if someone hits a go back button or when they submit something and I have to return to its calling page, I just look up that GUID pull out the URL, and that's the URL I go back to. So similar idea.
Yeah, cool. I hadn't thought of it from that aspect too. That's great.
So Ben, how do you approach maintenance on your GUID table, cleaning the old ones out?
Basically, I have a job that runs once a day, and if anything's over 1 day old, just remove it. It doesn't matter because I use a token that I've created that basically says create URL, and it basically creates a GUID based off of the current page and its entire URL structure. So when I click on a button that sends me to a new page, I immediately create a GUID based off the current URL, and I pass then that GUID ID to the next page. So every time you're moving along, that GUID is being recreated. That URL is being recreated all the time. So it harms nothing by deleting something that's 24 hours old. No one's going to be sitting on a page for 24 hours in my system.
That's pretty
At
clever.
that point, you're going to get logged out after 20 minutes. So, but it's a great way to also obfuscate that information. So people don't necessarily have to see what the URLs are that you're going back to, or any parameters that are on that URL or anything like that.
So in that case too, then, if you're using cookies to store, temporary values like that, you could use that table in its entirety and basically little or no cookies.
Yeah. Yep.
It's a good thought.
And when you do it that way, when you put your parameters or any information like that into a table as opposed to a cookie, it does secure that information a little bit more, because someone could still always sniff a browser for what the cookies and the session variables currently are. Just as developers, you go in here to development console and you can see what those values are in the back end. You save that into a table and just generate a random GUID on it. That means absolutely nothing. There's no way they can get to that information. They don't know what that GUID represents, what sub parameters, values, or anything that GUID references.
How what I've run into recently is in using a lot of cookies in this case a mobile first app. There's there's an expense associated with writing a cookie out to a browser from a cycle standpoint. If you've got, say, half a dozen values that you're writing out to the browser, do you have a perspective on whether that's more efficient from a timing standpoint, an expense standpoint, less efficient, the same, or don't know?
I don't know about anyone else. My suspicion would be that from a resource perspective, I would say 9 times out of 10, it's probably going to be faster to put it into a table, because you're talking about a server that has vast resources, multiple CPUs, vast resources with regards to memory, things like that. Whereas you have absolutely no clue what the browser on the client is going to be running. It could be a mobile device, a slow phone. It could be a little tiny tablet, an iPad, a little laptop with, 2 gigs of RAM, 4 gigs of RAM, whatever it is. You don't know. And overall, they're going to run much slower than obviously a server with all the resources behind it.
And you're also stuck with whatever the speed of the transport is. So if it's a mobile device with a slow, a slow.
Ben, do you put when you pass those variables, what do you build, like one string and then parse that, or do you end up making multiple table entries or extra fields? What technique have you come up with?
I do 2 different types of techniques. My initial technique from years ago, I actually create a string. I based it basically off of the idea of an INI file back in the day. So it's just a way of having a kind of a subject, a field ID, and its value. and it's just one long string that I parse. I have SQL functions that will basically create that string for me, as well as break it down and return to me a table. Since then, I've also now been kind of updating a lot of my code. There's still a lot that still uses my settings string, is what I call it. But I've also now been using JSON more often, because it's basically the same exact thing. And it's more recognized, and SQL 2016 can actually parse it natively. So, you know, basically whenever I come across a situation where I have to store a bunch of parameter values, like I said, I'll either use my settings string because it's there, but what I try to do more often than not now is use JSON, because it's just, you know, pretty standard, easy to read, and, you know, visible or understandable by not only SQL, but also a lot of the plant and app functions can read that and spit out tokens and things like that. So that answered your question. Sorry.
Good, thank you.
So back to Matt's, or to the question about efficiency. One of the things that early on, I did a lot with cookies in .NET development, and also in Plant.NET development, and I was stuffing far too much information into cookies. And one of the things I didn't realize was that when you hit submit, that all the cookies are transported with the request. So if you're storing a whole bunch of hunkin' big data that you weren't thinking about, it's not just the ones that it needs. It's just like everything comes with a request. So the page is just really, really dragging. It's just bad design to transfer all that data. So I suspect the technique of one GUID that gets you everywhere is gets you all your information is a far better, more efficient scenario.
Yeah, Dale, you made an amazing point there, and that's true, because especially think about it from like you're on not even Wi-Fi, you're using your cell service on a phone, and you have a lot of that information and cookies on that phone. That phone, every time you submit, has to transmit all that data back, as opposed to just transmitting a 32-bit, you know, alphanumeric character string, and that's it, which represents all the data.
So Ben, regarding this technique, then if somebody's traversing pages throughout the site, and again, in my case, you know, this is spot on because it's a mobile app. If they're traversing pages, are you creating a new record for that every step they take? Are you creating one record that, you know, catalogs their navigation? How are you doing that?
Well, in just using, for example, my return URL scenario, what I do in the system is the field that holds the data is actually indexed. So when I'm going to create a new one, if I already find that same exact value, I don't recreate it. I just use the existing GUID number that's in the table. And then, like I said, every 24 hours, I go in, and since everything has a created date, I just look at those records. Anything has a created date of over 24 hours gets erased, just so that that information is still kind of cleaning itself up and being a little bit more secure. But I wouldn't, just to save on taxing the SQL Server by recreating or creating duplicate records, as well as saving the indexing of every time you create a new record, it's got to change the index, and then you start talking about fragmentation within your database. If I'm looking first to see if that exact string already exists in the table and not recreate it, it just returns the GUID. If it's missing, it'll create it and then return the GUID. So either way, you're going to get a GUID, but if it's already in the database, I'm not going to recreate it. So for example, if a person's on a page, they hit submit, they go to a child page, they come back, they hit submit again, they're going to the same exact page with the same exact URL as that return. I'm not recreating it. There's no point. They already did it. It's already in the database. So I'm just giving them what I already have.
Is that, in that case, is that user specific? So let's say you and I are on the same site, and you and I happen to traverse in the same fashion, am I going to use your GUID, 10 seconds later?
Yes, because it's not going to be user specific, because it's in this particular case, it's URL specific.
Right.
If two people are on the same exact URL with the same exact parameters, that string already exists in the table. So
Okay.
if one person was looking at a customer record, and went delving into details for that customer, and someone else went to the same customer record and went to delve into the details, the first person to do it already created that GUID. They're going to reuse that same GUID. Again, just for the sake of not overtaxing the system in creating more data and more fragmentation of indexes that is unnecessary. The other thing too I want to point out, using this technique and this idea, because I know a lot of people use cookies because it has the ability to define an expiration, and they like that, using it for that reason. You could do the same exact thing with regards to tables. When you design your table, design it with an expiration date on it. Make it nullable if you don't want to use it. But then when you create that record, if you optionally create it with that expiration time, you can then create a job that runs, every 15 minutes or whatever, and say, when any record in there is over the expiration time, purge that record. So you can still do that same exact thing, so that data only exists for however much time you set it to.
Mm-hmm. Depending on in a case of a small site, you could actually have predetermined paths that you set up, save with no expiration. If for instance, somebody's going to typically traverse this way, you set it up, no expiration, and then it always exists. You'd have to refine. You wouldn't delete everything every 24 hours in that case. You delete everything in 24 hours that isn't one of your standard paths, so to speak.
Right. And again, same idea is just like that expiration idea. You can, if you wanted to, you could put a field in there and make it a bit flag and say, never delete.
Yep.
Set those that are your standards as never delete. So yeah, that 24-hour catch is just going to ignore them, because you're going to delete the ones that have never delete set to false.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bit like a URL shortening service, isn't it? Effectively.
That is exactly the idea behind it when I created it, because like I said, I was hitting that 2,000 character limit. So I was like, I need to shorten the URL. And I'm like, this is basically me creating a URL shortener, is what exactly it is.
Yeah, with the added advantage is it's obfuscated. I think that that limit on the length of URLs varies with the version of IIS you have. I think they have increased it, because I remember with SharePoint years ago, you used to hit that all the time, and obviously it being a Microsoft product.
It's not a server limitation. It's a browser limitation.
Oh, okay.
The address bar at the top will only accept 2,000 characters. It won't go any further. So if you had 2,000 characters and you tried on your keyboard to keep typing, no more characters will appear.
Yeah. I thought you could. I thought for if you were doing a get, it was longer. What I was going to share a little bit of a rabbit hole I went down a while back. We were building an app that was meant to be mobile, and started looking into progressive web apps and configuring the site as a progressive web app. And we were able to do that so that you got the button that said add to home screen, and it came up with the icon and that sort of thing. But part of that was a worker service that runs in the browser that manages a cache of data. So rather than cookies, you've got the browser local database, and if data is in there, it doesn't go off and fetch it. So that was the principle. We had a little bit of success with it, and didn't pursue it any further, because the client never actually built the content that we were going to expose. But it's if you're wanting to optimize for a mobile device and create a more mobile-like experience, it's worth having a look at the progressive web app specification and see if that might help. Not so much in the maybe some of the plugin app specific features, but in the overall management of the site and in the cookies that you're setting for other purposes. It would be worth having worth investigating.
Okay, so I'm gonna adjourn us to Afterglow here. You guys finally got into a good discussion. I'm glad we had something, and it was a good one. Thanks for sharing. So this is happy low coding, end of Campfire for today. Hang around for Afterglow. Thank you all.